on the subframe install, the first thing you have to do is get your subframe up here and mark it, and then go in here and remove all the paint on a 1/2 inch on each side of your mark, and that way you don't get any contamination to your weld. And then on this one, since it doesn't have a motor or any weight to it, I found a small clamp that would fit through the hole. Bring the camera up here, bro. Found this small clamp, just something we had laying around. You could probably buy them at Harbor Freight. But since this car had no weight to it, there was really no way to put any pressure on this. We used a small clamp to hold it in place. This side went on really easy. This side over here, we had to knock it in place with a rubber mallet, and we had to hit it pretty hard to get it in place. And then once we got it seated at this corner, it's not going to, because these end of the frame rails here, the subframe is not completely square. You want to drive it up as far as you can to make it contact, so that way you know you're seated as far as you can go this way. And then what we did is we went back here and used it. I'll show you on this side, is we used this clamp to hold it against the rear subframe, and this one to tighten it up to the rear subframe, because frankly it doesn't fit that well. And these cars are old and things have happened, and although there's no damage to the car, things didn't just pop into place.
But these will bolt in ultimately, right? And that will suck it up to the frame too.
No, these bolt in.
Okay,
this
so
bolts
this is welded
on. This is going to be welded on. And I got it as tight as I could to where this mount is touching this little tab here. We'll show you on this side. This tab is touching in the front, but it's not touching in the back. But that's an easy gap to fill, and there's no problem with that. And once we got it in place and got it as far forward and as high up as we could get it, we went in there and tacked it. And then we used the clamps to hold this side up, and we placed our subframe. And once we got it up as far forward as we could and as high up as we could match the distances, I matched the distance here to here are the same on both sides, just as kind of a reference. It just goes where it goes, basically. But once we got this one in place and held with the clamps, we put our X-Brace in. And we ended up actually having to move this one back about 200 thousandths so the bolt spacing would be even side to side. This brace, on some of them they have a shims they send with you, but on this one we actually had to knock it in place with a rubber hammer. It is that tight. So there's no bolts in it, and you ain't just pulling it out. But that's good too, because that way, you know, you got a good tight fit and there's not going to be much movement. You know, you're not worried about, you got more contact area, and there's not going to be much movement side to side after the, you know, final install. But one thing I will say is, if you watch the other videos, they don't do it, but we went in here and ground all this out, and then we taped it off and used a weldable primer. Anything on the back sides of the plates, on the back sides, everything that's not going to show, we use weldable primer so that we wouldn't have any corrosion or any kind of problems later. And another thing I like to do is, it tells you just on the faces that are showing, it says, well, just grind it back to weld. I take all the paint off so that when you go to repaint it, you're not seeing that burn line of your weld around it. You can get it you get it a little bit smoother and make it a little bit nicer.
So now, what's next step? I mean, we have the rear suspensions on its way, should be here this week. You wait for that before you permanently attach any of that, or
no, we're going to go ahead and burn this in, because this only this link has something to do with the rear end. We're going to go ahead and put it in. We're going to finish weld it, clean it up, get it painted up, and you know, before I do anything else, I'll make sure that this gap, you know, all the gaps are the same. This gap, if you look up front, you need to turn it around this way, brother.
you get on the other side of you completely. All right.
Even though we drove this as far forward and as far up as we could get it, we still have a gap here, and that's easily welded. But this side was actually a little bit tighter. So what I did, in order to keep all the bolt holes to give us as much chance as possible of everything working, I took my steel rule, which is one of the handiest things you can have during all this, and measured the gap. You know, you can measure it from this side, just put it up there and look back here. It's right at 300 thousandths. And then come over here, and it's right at 300 thousandths. So I had to actually pull this one down a little bit so that everything would sit in here nice and even. I know it doesn't look even if you really look at it, because our lift is actually out of level. This is a really old lift we got the car on, so that's why you can't really use the level, and you're better off measuring everything. Even if no lift's going to be perfectly level unless you got, I don't know any lift that's perfectly level. So, you know, measure it twice, weld it once, I guess.
You can tell they put a lot of work into this car before we got it, obviously. Underside looks really, really good.
It's red oxide like it should be on, I'm guessing. From what factory this came, you know what factory this came out of?
I think all of the 68s are red oxide. I don't think that slop stuff changed until later.
So I mean, everything's nice and smooth. And one of the things we did preparing for the next part of the project is we went in here and we welded this plate here, really welded well around here, but right here there's so much material thickness difference that every time we tried to weld it, to get any good penetration, it burned through more, but it's not going to make that much difference. So with the good weld we got around to these sides of it, and that's mainly where the load's going to be, I think it'll be perfectly fine. You want to show that piece?
Yeah. Yeah, we get on the other side of that, away from that light.
So next thing is we're going to weld her up and hope our parts come in.
All right. They're on their way.
That is transmission where it goes, X-Brace put in place, not bolted up. 5 degrees of tilt in the motor, or engine, I guess I would say. Plenty of clearance for the sway bar. I guess that's about it. This is the hole, how it ended up before we fix it. Everything outlined in blue will be replaced. I'll make a patch panel for that and just make the hole round again and put these supports back up under it. We'll go under here. I will most likely use this as my final that's how to make the final hole, but that's how it will go. And I'll get that patch made and come back.
But on this, we got to. What I need to know is, do we know offsets? I mean, do we know what that needs to be to set that tire in there right?
Okay, we got the shifter ring moved over and worked back in. It had to move it, had to turn it sideways and move it up to the edge of this. If it would have been better off if it was back a 1/4 inch towards the back of the car. It would have centered up a little bit better. I got off on my marks, but it works there. But to give it some more clearance, I had to trim it here and here about 200 thousandths just to make sure it would have cleared. But you know, you don't want it under a load to be causing a vibration, so I actually trimmed it back a little bit farther. This is what the inside looks like after I moved it over. I did weld some washers in there to kind of reinforce it a little bit because I didn't like how the edges of the metal were laying down. Once we get the sound deadener on there, that'll all be smooth and you'll never see any of that. But not crazy about it, but I mean, it'll work.